When I first brought Ben into my life, I had no idea what kind of journey it would be. Being an adoptive parent was supposed to be one of the most fulfilling experiences of my life, yet here I was standing at the threshold of his bedroom door, wondering where I went wrong. Ben had been through so much in his early years before he came to live with me. His biological parents, who had struggled with addiction, had left him in and out of foster homes for most of his childhood. So when I opened my heart to him, I thought I was offering him a chance at a new start. I believed that love and guidance could heal the wounds he'd carried with him for so long. But now, nearly 35 years later, Ben was the same boy he had been when he arrived at my doorstep, only older. And I found myself questioning if I had done everything I could to help him succeed in life. I had spent years trying to build a life for Ben that was different from the one he had known. I encouraged him to work hard in school, to explore his interests, and to dream big. I worked 2 jobs to give him everything he could possibly need, from new clothes to extracurricular activities that would open up doors for him. I hoped that with time, he would find his passion, develop a sense of purpose, and eventually step out into the world on his own. But over time, I began to realize that the dream I had for him, a successful, independent young man who could navigate life with confidence, was slipping further and further out of reach. Ben, now 35, had built his world around the glow of a computer screen. He spent every waking hour in front of it, playing video games with a focus and intensity I had never seen him put into anything else. I had tried to understand his love for gaming. As a teenager, I thought it was just a phase, something he would grow out of once he entered adulthood. But I was wrong. He had gotten so caught up in his games that nothing else seemed to matter to him anymore. I'd watch him sit for hours on end, fully immersed in a world that wasn't real, where he was the hero, where he had control, and where his only responsibilities were completing levels and defeating imaginary enemies. I tried to be understanding at first, thinking it was his way of escaping from his troubles. After all, he had gone through a lot in his youth, and maybe this was his coping mechanism. But as the years passed, it became clear that this was not just a phase. This was his life. His room was a fortress of electronics, 3 monitors, multiple gaming consoles, shelves stacked with video game collections, and a comfy chair that looked like it had molded to his body over time. His life outside this room was non-existent. He barely interacted with friends or family, and any attempt to get him to take part in anything outside of his virtual world was met with resistance. I'd say, "Ben, let's go for a walk," or "Why don't you come to the kitchen and help me make dinner?" His usual response was a quick dismissal. "I'm in the middle of a game, Mom." I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and deeply worried. I had tried so many ways to get through to him. I gently remind him of the future he was throwing away, telling him that it wasn't healthy to live this way, that he needed a job, a purpose. I offered to help him with job applications, to set up interviews, to do whatever it took to get him started. But each time, he'd shrug it off, as if my concern was just another nuisance in his life. "I'll do it later, Mom," he'd say, and later never came. It was hard not to be frustrated, even angry. I felt like I had failed him. I had tried to provide him with everything he needed. But what had I gotten in return? A man-child who couldn't see beyond the screen of his game. Someone who didn't understand the value of hard work or the importance of building a life for himself. I had raised him with so much love, and yet, there he was, completely disconnected from the world around him, unwilling to take responsibility for his own future. I tried to hide my disappointment, to pretend like everything was okay, but the cracks were starting to show. Every time I walked into his room, I'd see him sitting there, staring blankly at the screen, his face lit up by the soft glow of the game. And I'd wonder, what happened to my son? What happened to the boy who used to dream about becoming a computer programmer or starting his own business? It wasn't just the gaming that bothered me. It was his complete lack of ambition. For years, I had watched him waste his potential, and each day it became harder to ignore. I'd see other people his age succeeding, advancing in their careers, starting families, and living independently, and I couldn't help but compare Ben to them. It was painful. I began to wonder if I had enabled this. I had never wanted to push him too hard, fearing that I'd drive him away or crush his spirit. I always made excuses for him, telling myself that he just needed more time, that he needed to find his own way. I had been patient, so patient, but my patience was running out. What made it worse was that deep down, I knew Ben was capable of so much more. I'd seen glimpses of his potential, in the way he would talk about computers when he was younger, or the ideas he'd have for gaming websites and mobile apps. But now, all of that was buried under layers of laziness and self-imposed isolation. I knew he was better than this, but I couldn't make him see it. And so, I found myself standing at the door of his room once again, watching him hunched over his gaming chair, oblivious to everything around him. I had tried every approach, gentle nudges, tough love, encouragement, even frustration, but nothing had made a difference. I couldn't keep pretending that this was okay anymore. Ben wasn't just a man who refused to grow up. He was a man who had stopped trying, and it broke my heart to see him wasting away in front of me. And I knew, deep down, that I had to do something. Something had to change. But I didn't know yet what that change would look like. That night, after another week of failed attempts to get Ben to take any responsibility for his life, I finally reached my breaking point. I had been watching him, day after day, retreating further into his gaming world, avoiding any conversation about his future. It was like I was invisible to him, and the hardest part was realizing that he didn't even seem to care. I had spent years supporting him, guiding him, and doing everything I could to help him succeed. But none of it mattered. I sat down on the couch, my hands shaking as I held my coffee mug. The warmth of it barely registered as I stared at the empty walls. The house, once filled with the noise of laughter and activity, had become eerily quiet. Ben was upstairs in his room, and I hadn't heard him say much beyond the usual, "I'm busy," or "I'm too tired," when I asked him to join me downstairs for dinner or to help with chores. But tonight I knew I couldn't let it go on any longer. I had been patient, too patient perhaps. I had tried to be understanding, telling myself that he would eventually grow up, that he needed time to find his way. But with every passing day, I could feel the weight of the years pressing down on me. I was exhausted, both emotionally and physically, from the constant battle of trying to get him to see reason. Ben had stopped trying altogether, and so had I, until tonight. I took a deep breath, setting my coffee down carefully on the table. My mind was made up. This was it. I couldn't sit back and watch him waste his life anymore. He was nearly 35, and still he had no job, no ambition, no direction. All he cared about was his video games, and it was eating away at him, piece by piece. It wasn't just that he was wasting time. He was wasting his potential, his future, and it broke my heart. I walked up the stairs to his room, my footsteps heavy with frustration. I could hear the familiar hum of his gaming setup before I even reached the door. I knocked lightly, unsure of how he would react. He didn't answer, so I knocked again, louder this time. After a long pause, I heard his muffled voice from inside. "What do you want?" I opened the door slowly, peering inside. Ben was sitting there, just like I'd left him earlier in the day, eyes glued to the screen, fingers moving swiftly over the controller. His face was bathed in the blue glow of the monitors, his headset covering most of his face. He barely acknowledged me. "Ben, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He glanced up, barely making eye contact. "What about?" He sounded irritated. "I'm tired of this, Ben," I began, trying to keep my tone calm, though the frustration in my voice was impossible to hide. "You can't keep living like this. You need to get a job. You need to stop playing games all day and take some responsibility for your life." I watched as his fingers paused for a moment over the controller, but he didn't look up at me. I could see the way his shoulders tensed, his posture defensive. It was as if he had already made up his mind that he didn't want to hear anything I had to say. "I don't need a job right now, Mom. I'm fine," he muttered. The words sounding rehearsed, like he'd said them 1,000 times before. Why do you always have to make everything such a big deal? That's when it hit me. All these years, I had been letting him convince me that everything was fine, that he was okay, that he just needed more time. But he wasn't okay. He was stuck in a cycle, and I had been letting him stay there, thinking that eventually he'd figure it out. But he wasn't going to figure it out. Not if I kept enabling him. "No, Ben," I said firmly, my voice rising slightly. "You're not fine. You're 35 years old, and you're living like a teenager. You need to start making something of yourself. You can't live in this fantasy world forever." He finally looked up, his face flushed with anger. "What is your problem, Mom?" he snapped. "I'm not hurting anyone. I'm just playing games. I don't need your lectures." It felt like a slap in the face. For all the years I'd spent raising him, nurturing him, and giving him everything I had, this was the response I got. He wasn't hurting anyone, he said. But I had spent years watching him waste away in front of me, and I had allowed it to continue. I took another deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "You're not a kid anymore, Ben," I said, my voice softening, though there was still an edge of frustration. "You need to take control of your life. You need to find a job, make some plans. I can't keep supporting you like this." He stood up then, his chair scraping against the floor. "You don't get it, do you?" His voice was sharp. "I don't need a job. I don't need to do what you want me to do. I'm fine. I'm happy the way I am." I stared at him, the anger bubbling up inside me. "You think you're happy?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. "You think this is a life worth living? Hiding in your room all day, playing games, and doing nothing else? I've given you everything I can, Ben. Everything. And this is how you repay me?" His eyes narrowed, and I could see the frustration in his face. "I don't want your help. I don't need you to fix me. I'm fine just the way I am." In that moment, something inside me snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. I had spent so many years bending over backward for him, trying to be understanding, trying to give him the space to find himself. But I had come to realize that he wasn't going to change unless I made him. I turned on my heel, walking out of the room without another word. I knew we were at an impasse, and something had to give. I couldn't let him keep living this way. I couldn't keep enabling his refusal to grow up. It was time to set some boundaries. It was time to stop pretending everything was okay. As I made my way back downstairs, I felt a pit in my stomach. I wasn't sure how things were going to play out, but I knew that I couldn't go on like this. I had tried everything, and now I had to make a choice. Would I continue to enable his behavior, or would I finally take a stand and demand that he take responsibility for his life? It wasn't going to be easy, but I had reached the point where I knew I couldn't keep supporting his refusal to grow up. Tonight, things were going to change, and there was no turning back. The conversation had escalated so quickly, I could hardly process what was happening. Everything I had said to Ben had been in an effort to help him see the reality of his life, to help him understand the importance of taking responsibility for his future. I wasn't prepared for the anger that suddenly erupted, like a storm breaking the calm. Ben's face twisted in fury, his hands trembling as he stood up. For a moment, there was silence between us, the only sound being the hum of his gaming equipment in the background. But then, with a sudden and violent movement, Ben shoved me hard. It happened so fast I barely had time to react before I was thrown backward, crashing into the furniture behind me. The force of the push knocked me off balance, and I hit the couch with a sickening thud. My breath left me, and I couldn't seem to regain it. Everything spun around me. My chest tightened as panic rose, and for a moment I just sat there, stunned, unable to fully comprehend what had just happened. My son, the boy I had raised with so much love and care, had physically hurt me. I had never imagined it, never even considered the possibility, Ben didn't seem to care. He didn't even check to see if I was okay. His face was red with rage, his fists clenched, and his voice was like a roar. "You've ruined my life," he shouted, his eyes blazing. "You think you can tell me what to do? You think you have the right to control me? I don't need you. I never did." The words stung more than I could describe, each one like a dagger to my heart, but nothing, absolutely nothing, was worse than what came next. As I tried to regain my bearings, he stepped forward, pushing me aside without hesitation. He was taller and stronger than me now, and the anger in his eyes was something I had never seen before. Then, without warning, he kicked me hard, right in the side, sending me stumbling sideways into the hallway. The shock and pain were overwhelming. I gasped, my body shaking from the impact. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that my own son, the one I had cared for all his life, would do something like this to me. "Get out!" he yelled, his voice full of venom. "You're not welcome here anymore. Leave. Now." I stood there, frozen for a moment, trying to understand what had just happened. My head was spinning, my heart was pounding in my chest. The anger in his voice, the violence in his actions. It was like I was looking at a stranger. This wasn't the Ben I had raised. This wasn't the boy who had once run to me for comfort when he scraped his knee, who used to come to me for advice, who I thought still needed me. This man in front of me, angry and unrecognizable, was a complete stranger. I felt the hot tears stinging my eyes, but I refused to let them fall, not in front of him. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I stood up shakily, trying to regain my composure, trying to hold on to whatever dignity I had left. "Ben," I said, my voice cracking, barely above a whisper. "I raised you. I've given you everything, and this is how you repay me?" But Ben was beyond reasoning now. His eyes were wild, his breathing heavy, and he was still standing there, seething. He had crossed a line, and I knew there was no going back. He didn't care about the years of sacrifice, the love I had poured into raising him. All that mattered to him now was his own anger, his own sense of entitlement. "I don't need you," he spat, his words full of bitterness. "Get out, you're just holding me back." And then, just like that, he turned and slammed the door in my face, leaving me standing there in the hallway, my heart racing and my body shaking from the shock of it all. I stood there, not knowing what to do. I couldn't believe what had just happened. It felt like a nightmare, but it was real. It was too real. For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there on the floor. I felt like my world was crumbling, like everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, had been thrown back in my face. I had never imagined that my son would turn on me this way. I had always hoped that one day we would be able to look back at all the years together with gratitude and love. But now it felt like everything was shattered in an instant. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't stay in that house any longer, with Ben's hateful words and the violent memory of what he had just done. But what was I supposed to do? Where was I supposed to go? I had nothing. I had given up everything for him, and now it felt like I had nothing left but the hollow ache in my chest. I stood there for a while, unsure of what to do next. My mind was reeling, and my body was still trembling from the shock of it all. I knew I couldn't go back into that room, couldn't let him continue to treat me like this. It was clear now. Ben had made his decision, and I had to make mine. As I slowly walked toward the door, I realized that things had changed forever. My son had just crossed a line I never thought he would, and I had no idea what would happen next. Would he ever apologize? Would he ever understand what he had done? Or was this the end of our relationship? The questions swirled in my mind, but one thing was clear. I couldn't let him continue to treat me this way. I had to find a way to stand up for myself, even if it meant losing him forever. I opened the door and stepped outside, my body still shaking, my heart heavy. The world felt colder now, the air sharper. And as I stood there, alone on the doorstep, I realized that this was the moment where everything changed. I stood on the porch, suitcase in hand, my legs trembling beneath me as I stared at the closed door. The sound of it slamming shut echoed in my ears like a final, devastating blow. Ben had just kicked me out of my own home, and I couldn't process the weight of it. How had we gotten here? How had it all unraveled so quickly? I had spent over 30 years of my life raising him, giving him everything I could. Love, attention, guidance, stability. I poured my heart into him, believing that one day all the sacrifices I made would pay off, that he would grow into a responsible, independent man who would appreciate the things I did for him. But this wasn't the future I had imagined for us. I thought back to the moments we shared, the late-night talks when he was a teenager, the way he'd come to me for advice, the times I'd stay up late helping him with school projects or comforting him after a bad day. He had been my world, and I had been his. I had always tried to make sure he felt loved, valued, and understood. And now, in the blink of an eye, all of that seemed meaningless. I could still feel the sting of his words. "I don't need you. Get out." His voice had been full of venom, the anger in his eyes as he kicked me out of the house. It felt like it was burning into my soul. My heart hurt with a pain I couldn't put into words. Ben had never spoken to me like that before. The boy I had raised, the one who had been so close to me, had just rejected me, and there was no mistaking it. This was no ordinary disagreement. It was the end of something, a complete and total rejection. I looked down at the suitcase in my hand, as if it could somehow answer the questions swirling in my mind. What was I supposed to do now? Where would I go? I couldn't believe I was standing here, alone, abandoned by my own son. I had nowhere to turn, and it felt like my entire world had collapsed in on itself. I had always thought that no matter what happened, no matter how difficult things got, Ben would never turn his back on me. After all, I had been his mother. The person who had always been there. The person who had raised him when he had no one else. But now I was the one being abandoned, and I was left wondering how I could have missed the signs. Was I that blind? Had I been so focused on helping him, so determined to make his life easier, that I failed to see the growing resentment in his heart? A cold wind blew across the porch, making me shiver. It wasn't just the chill in the air that made me feel cold. It was the emptiness that was suddenly all around me. There was nothing left in that house. No warmth, no love, no connection. Only the bitter sting of rejection. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but my chest felt tight. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout at him through that door, to demand that he understand how much I had given for him, how much I loved him. But I knew, deep down, that nothing I said would make a difference. He had made his decision, and I had to accept it. I turned around, slowly walking away from the house, feeling the weight of every step I took. Each one felt like I was leaving a part of myself behind. This was the life I had built for so long, and it was slipping through my fingers like sand. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. I had to get away from the house, away from the man who had just ripped my heart out. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the street as I walked down the sidewalk, suitcase still in hand. I felt like I was walking through a fog, unable to see clearly, unsure of what the future held. The road ahead felt uncertain and dark. My mind raced with questions, but there were no answers. What was I supposed to do now? How could I move forward when the one person I had dedicated my life to had just turned his back on me? I had no answers, no plan. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house anymore. The rejection was too much. The pain was too much. So I kept walking, trying to find a place, a moment where I could breathe again. But with every step, the weight of what had just happened settled deeper into my bones. I had always imagined that I would be there for Ben as he grew up, watching him succeed, supporting him when life was hard. But now I was standing at the edge of everything I knew, with no idea what to do next. All I wanted in that moment was to make the pain go away. But I knew deep down that this wasn't something I could run from. I had to face it, no matter how much it hurt. And facing it meant accepting that the person I had given everything for had just rejected me in the most final way possible. The door had just slammed in my face, and I was standing on my porch, holding nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of disbelief. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. I had just been thrown out of my own home, but I wasn't going to let Ben's actions define me. He may have rejected me, but I wasn't going to allow myself to be a victim of his cruelty. I walked away from the porch, my suitcase in hand, but my mind was already working. I didn't know where I would go, but I knew there was something I could do. I turned around and walked right back into the house. There was a certain strength growing inside me, one I hadn't felt in years. I had spent so much of my life bending to Ben's will, trying to make his life easier, trying to make him happy. But now, after everything that had just happened, I realized that I had been neglecting my own needs. I had been giving, and he had taken it all, without a single word of appreciation. That was about to change. As soon as I stepped inside, I headed straight for Ben's room. The door was closed, but I could hear the faint hum of his gaming console inside. He was probably still sitting there, playing away, acting like nothing had happened. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the doorknob, gathering my thoughts. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, but it wasn't out of fear. It was out of a deep, burning sense of resolution. This was it. I had had enough. I opened the door slowly, and there he was, Ben, sitting in his gaming chair, the glow of the screen casting an eerie light on his face. He didn't even look up when I entered. He was so absorbed in his game, as if nothing in the world mattered except for the game in front of him. I watched him for a moment, and the anger that had been simmering inside me finally boiled over. Without a word, I walked over to his desk. His gaming console, his expensive headset, his computer, it was all right there. I had always known how much he loved his games, how much time he poured into them. I had been supportive, thinking it was just a phase, thinking he would eventually grow out of it. But that was before he pushed me out of the house. That was before I realized how little respect he had for me. I picked up his console, the weight of it feeling strange in my hands. It wasn't just a piece of equipment anymore. It represented the years of my life that I had spent trying to give him everything, only for him to toss it all aside. It represented the man he had become, someone who would choose a screen over his own mother. My stomach twisted with a mixture of frustration and betrayal, but I didn't hesitate. I walked out of his room, taking everything with me. I didn't care if he came after me. I didn't care if he screamed or cried. I was done being treated like an afterthought. I grabbed my phone and called a local pawn shop. It was time to get rid of everything that had kept him trapped in this cycle of apathy and immaturity. The pawn shop owner was more than willing to take the gaming equipment off my hands, and I arranged for them to come pick it up that afternoon. As I waited for the pickup, I sat in the living room, feeling a strange sense of relief. I had taken control. I wasn't just allowing myself to be steamrolled by his behavior anymore. I was taking back my power, even if it was just in this small act. It was a reminder that I was still in charge of my life, despite the chaos Ben had created. When the pawn shop arrived, I watched them load the equipment into the truck. It felt like the weight of years of disappointment was being lifted off my shoulders. The money from the sale didn't go into my pockets. I had no interest in using it for myself. No, I had a different plan. I knew exactly who I wanted to give the money to. James, the son of one of my closest friends, had been struggling to find a job. He was a hard-working young man, always looking for ways to improve his situation. But he had been having a tough time getting a break. I had always admired his dedication and ambition. He reminded me of the person I had hoped Ben would become. Driven, focused, and determined. James deserved this money more than Ben ever did. It wasn't just about the money, it was about giving someone the chance to prove themselves. Someone who was trying, someone who appreciated the value of hard work. I called James's mother and told her what I had done. She was shocked at first, but I could tell she understood. I knew she had always wanted the best for her son, just as I had for mine. But sometimes, life doesn't turn out the way you plan. Sometimes, you have to step away from the ones you love in order to protect yourself. And sometimes, you have to let someone else have the chance to shine. I transferred the money to James's bank account, telling him to use it for whatever he needed to improve his chances, whether it was for clothes for interviews, a resume service, or anything else that would help him. I told him that I believed in him, and that I hoped he would take this opportunity to build the future he deserved. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had done something right. I had made a decision that wasn't based on guilt, obligation, or fear. I had made a choice for me, for my future, and for someone who truly deserved the chance to grow. As I walked back into the house, I realized that I had already begun to take the first steps toward healing. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew now that I was no longer going to sacrifice my peace for someone who couldn't appreciate it. I had made a choice to take control of my life, and that was a feeling I hadn't had in years. And as for Ben, I wasn't sure what the future held for him, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't concerned with what he was doing. I was focused on me, on my own growth, and on helping those who truly valued it. The weight of the past was slowly starting to lift, one small act of defiance at a time. The days following the incident were difficult, but something in me had shifted. The emotional shock from being thrown out of my own home began to settle, and in its place was a quiet, determined resolve. I had always prided myself on being patient and understanding, but Ben's actions had crossed a line. I had let myself be manipulated for far too long, and it was time to stand firm. I knew Ben would eventually find out what I had done. There was no way he wouldn't notice that his gaming setup was gone. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone, least of all to him, but I knew that he would come looking for answers. I wasn't ready to confront him yet, but I had no doubt that a conversation was inevitable. And when that moment came, I wanted to be prepared. For the first time in years, I sat down and wrote a letter to Ben. It wasn't an angry rant. It wasn't a plea for him to understand. It was simply a statement of the facts, of the reality of his behavior and the way it had impacted me. I told him that his reaction to my suggestion that he get a job had been unacceptable. But more than that, I told him how his actions had shattered something inside of me. I spoke honestly about the years I had spent trying to support him, always believing that one day he would grow up and take responsibility for his own life. But after all that had happened, I realized that I had been enabling him, coddling him, and sacrificing my own happiness for his comfort. The letter wasn't meant to be a guilt trip. It wasn't meant to make him feel sorry for me. It was simply me taking back my voice. I needed him to understand that I wasn't just some person he could dismiss. I had spent too many years silently supporting him, hoping that someday he would see the sacrifices I had made for him. But I was done with that hope. I wasn't going to continue pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. The act of writing the letter felt cathartic. I poured everything I had been holding inside onto the paper. I talked about my love for him, yes, but I also expressed my pain. The hurt of watching him waste his life away while I worked hard to provide for both of us. The sadness of seeing him reject not just my advice, but my love and care. I ended the letter by telling him that I could no longer be the person who allowed him to live in denial. It was time for him to wake up. After I finished writing, I sat with the letter in front of me for a while, staring at the words. I was proud of myself for being so honest. But at the same time, there was a knot in my stomach. I knew what was coming. I knew that Ben was going to be furious when he read it. I wasn't sure how he would react, but I had already prepared myself for the worst. The confrontation happened a few days later. Ben showed up at my door, his face red with anger, his eyes narrowed in fury. He didn't waste any time. He stormed into the living room, demanding to know why I had sold his gaming equipment. I stayed calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't going to let his temper dictate the tone of the conversation. I took a deep breath, and I told him exactly why I had done it. I explained that his behavior had finally gone too far, that I couldn't stand by and watch him waste his life. Ben, I said, my voice steady, you can't keep living like this. You can't keep hiding behind these video games while the rest of your life falls apart. I've tried to be patient, I've tried to support you, but you've made it clear that none of it matters to you. You've rejected me. You've rejected everything I've tried to do for you. So I took away the one thing that you clearly care about more than anything else. Maybe it'll make you see what you've been doing to yourself. I watched his face change as he heard my words, his anger turning to confusion, then to resentment. He started shouting, telling me that I had no right to do what I did, that I was trying to control him, and that he didn't need my help. He accused me of being selfish, of not understanding his passion for gaming. But I didn't flinch. I didn't let his words affect me the way they used to. I gave the money to someone who actually deserves it, I told him. James, my friend's son. He's been working hard to find a job, and he deserves a chance to succeed. That's what I want for you too, Ben, but you have to want it for yourself. Ben fell silent for a moment, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. He didn't know how to respond. And for once, neither did I. I didn't need to say anything more. I had said everything that needed to be said. There was no going back now. I wasn't trying to break him, but I knew that I couldn't keep enabling his behavior. If I didn't stand up for myself now, I would never have the chance to do it again. This was the turning point, not just for me, but for him as well. I could only hope that one day he would understand why I had made the choices I did. But in that moment, I knew I had finally found my voice, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me again. Ben stormed out of the house shortly after that. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat back down at the kitchen table, the weight of everything that had just happened settling in. But I didn't feel defeated. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. I had done the right thing, even if it didn't feel easy. And as I sat there, I realized something else. I wasn't just standing up for myself. I was standing up for the future I deserved. A future where I wasn't stuck in the past, trying to fix someone else's life while neglecting my own. I was ready to move forward, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone hold me back. The decision to take a stand had been a long time coming, but it wasn't until that moment, standing up to Ben and taking control of my own life, that I truly understood what I had been doing all these years. It was almost as if a fog had lifted, and I could finally see things for what they were. I had spent my entire adult life dedicating myself to Ben, believing that my sacrifices were for a greater good. I thought that by giving up my own dreams, my own needs, I was somehow helping him become the person I wanted him to be. But I was wrong. As I sat in the house after our confrontation, a mix of emotions swirled in my chest. There was anger, yes, but there was also relief. The weight of years of emotional labor that I had been carrying, the constant pressure to be everything to him, began to dissipate. I had spent so long living in the shadow of Ben's needs, and I had convinced myself that if I just gave more of myself, if I just pushed harder, things would get better, but they hadn't. They hadn't for a long time, and now I could see that it wasn't just about Ben anymore. It was about me. It was about reclaiming the pieces of myself I had buried under the role of mother, and finding out who I was outside of that identity. The truth was, I had been sacrificing my happiness for him. Every small decision I made for years had been for him. Whether it was skipping vacations because I couldn't afford them while paying for his schooling, or putting off my own career ambitions so I could work extra hours to support us both. I told myself that I was doing it for him, But the reality was that I had slowly lost myself in the process. My dreams became his dreams. My life became his life. I had become so wrapped up in taking care of him that I forgot about taking care of me. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just Ben who needed to change. I needed to change too. I needed to stop pretending that my identity was tied to being a mother. I needed to start thinking about what I wanted, what I needed, and how I could finally live for myself. Packing my bags was symbolic, more than anything. The house felt empty, not just physically, but emotionally as well. It was the house I had raised Ben in, filled with memories of sleepless nights, birthday parties, and holidays. But it was also filled with the quiet frustration of unspoken resentment, of moments where I had felt invisible, where I had felt like my sacrifices went unnoticed. As I folded my clothes, packing away the remnants of my life, I realized that leaving was not just a physical departure from the house. It was a departure from the woman I had been for all these years, the woman who had been willing to give everything for a son who no longer seemed to care. I wasn't leaving Ben behind, but I was leaving the version of myself that had allowed this dynamic to continue. The version of myself who had put Ben's needs ahead of everything else, even my own happiness. I was breaking free from the chains of guilt and expectation that had bound me to him for so long. The hardest part wasn't leaving the house. It was leaving behind the identity I had spent years building. I had been a mother, a caregiver, a fixer. But now I was ready to be something else. I was ready to be just me, a woman with hopes and desires of her own. It wasn't that I didn't love Ben anymore. I did, more than anything. But love couldn't be the only reason I continued to put myself second. As I looked around at the half-empty house, memories flooding my mind, I realized that I was no longer willing to stay in this emotional prison. I had spent years putting my energy into fixing Ben, into trying to create a life for him that I thought would bring us both happiness. But it was clear that he needed to make his own choices now, and I needed to make mine. I was finally giving myself permission to live outside of the expectations I had placed on myself, to live without constantly sacrificing for someone else. I closed the last bag, looked around the room one final time, and made my way out. I didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew it would be somewhere that allowed me to find peace, somewhere where I could rebuild myself, step by step. It was time to live for me, not for anyone else. And as I walked out the door, I realized that in letting go of the life I had been living for Ben, I was finally giving myself a chance to find the life I was meant to live. While I was struggling to pick up the pieces of my own life, something happened that reminded me that hope still existed. Even in the midst of all this chaos, James, the son of one of my closest friends, had always been a bright young man, full of potential but struggling to find his way in the world. He had recently been laid off from his job at a local cafe, and despite his best efforts, had been struggling to land a new one. My heart ached for him, especially after everything I had been through with Ben. Here was a young man who truly wanted to better his life, who hadn't given up, even when the world had turned its back on him. I hadn't really spoken to James much before this, other than casual hellos at family gatherings. But when I found myself selling Ben's gaming setup, it made me think of James. And I knew I had to do something. I had the money from selling Ben's games, and instead of keeping it, I decided to give it to James. It wasn't much, but it could help him get the tools he needed to make a fresh start. I gave him the money to help him buy professional clothes for interviews and to pay for a resume service. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the right thing to do, especially after everything I had just been through with Ben. James was overwhelmed when I offered him the money. He thanked me profusely, but I could see in his eyes that he was deeply grateful. I could tell that this act of kindness would mean more than just financial help. It was a message, one that told him someone believed in him. It told him that even though life had been tough, there were still people out there who cared enough to lend a hand. James used the money wisely. He went to work with a new sense of purpose, determined to turn things around. Within weeks, he had secured a job at a marketing firm, something that aligned with his degree and his skills. I watched from the sidelines, proud of him, but also hopeful. James's success gave me a sense of renewal. It was proof that hard work, persistence, and a little bit of help from others could make all the difference. I watched his confidence grow as he started his new job, and it reminded me that there was still hope, even after the mess I had been through with Ben. It was in this moment that I realized just how much of a difference the right kind of support could make. James wasn't a perfect person, but he had the kind of determination that I wished Ben would have had. James wasn't wasting his time on distractions. He was actively seeking ways to improve his life. And even though I had been burned by my relationship with Ben, I felt a sense of pride watching James succeed. He had turned a corner, and in doing so, he had reignited a spark of hope in me that I thought had gone out. I couldn't help but compare James's attitude to Ben's. James's growth was tangible, and it was exactly the kind of path I had always hoped Ben would take. I had tried to encourage Ben, to help him see that he needed to take his life seriously, but my attempts had fallen on deaf ears. Watching James, however, showed me that it wasn't too late for some people. It was just a matter of wanting to change. James had reminded me of what it meant to keep pushing forward. He had reminded me that not all young people are lost in their own world of entitlement and excuses. James had the drive to make things happen, and for the first time in a while, I felt like there was hope for the future. His success, even in such a small way, was a victory for all of us who had been looking for a glimmer of something better. I sent him a text that day, letting him know how proud I was of him. It wasn't just about landing a job. It was about showing that change is possible when you're willing to put in the effort. I told him to keep pushing, to stay focused, and that no matter what, I would always be there to support him. As I watched James begin his new chapter, I also felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. It wasn't the same as the bitter disappointment I had felt with Ben, but it was the first time in a long while that I saw someone I cared about, really succeed. And that in itself was worth celebrating. James had given me the hope I needed to keep going. I realized that I could have been as proud of Ben as I was of James, if Ben had simply shown a fraction of the drive and dedication that James had. But even if Ben wasn't on that path yet, watching James succeed reminded me that there would always be people who rise up, even in the face of adversity. It was a lesson I would carry with me moving forward, that sometimes the people you help along the way are the ones who will inspire you to change your own life. And for that, I would always be grateful to James. Months passed, and I finally found peace. I stopped chasing Ben and focused on myself. I redecorated my home, spent time with friends, and even started volunteering. For the first time, I wasn't living for anyone else but me. When Ben reached out, I calmly told him I loved him, but I couldn't keep enabling him. I was ready to move on with my life. Sitting alone, sipping tea in my sunny living room, I realized I was free.